We are live. Good afternoon, everybody. It is 12 o'clock, Friday, the 12th of June. The noonday gun has just gone off here in Cape Town, so very warm welcome to all of you. Welcome to Real Estate Investor Talk. This is our weekly webinar brought to you by REI Mag in conjunction with Let's Talk Property. My name is Neil Peterson, and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Real Estate Investor Mag and the REMAG digital platform. We help real estate investors, buyers, and property practitioners keep up to date with the latest news, information, resources, education, and property tools to keep you at the forefront of your property game. We cover everything on residential, commercial, or offshore, good or bad news, or any principles for real estate investors, buyers, property practitioners, and the property industry in South Africa and the rest of the globe. REI Talk hosts these thought leadership webinars every Friday from 12 to 1 o'clock. And today we are in day 78, believe it or not, 78 of lockdown, alert level 3. And the real estate sector is mostly open for business, but still with restrictions, strict rules and limitations. And as we try and navigate our way through this COVID-19 dilemma and this pandemic. So today our webinar topic is how affordable housing investment can propel the South African property market post-COVID-19. And so today we are here to learn about this market sector and hear from our expert panelists in the affordable property sector, who will all introduce themselves to you very shortly. I would like to welcome you, the audience, and we look forward to your participation in today's webinar. So to our audience, for the best audio and visual quality, please switch off all other streaming videos or anything else that slows down your internet or that could affect your broadcast. And if you do log off for any reason, you can just re-enter the webinar with the same link that you had originally. So on the bottom right of your screen, you'll see there is a Q&A icon for any questions that you'd like to pose to the panelists, and we encourage that. And so just please identify the panelists and your question, and we will deal with them in the last section of the webinar. There's also a chat box on the left for any general queries, comments, technical issues, or any important links, or even contact details that you would like to share. There will also be a poll with multiple choice questions that will pop up on your screen periodically, and we will ask you to vote during this webinar, so please also participate in that as well. If you're looking for replays of this webinar and other previous webinars, they're available to those of you that either came on late onto the show or those who had to log out early. You can view this webinar and other replays in our series, which is posted on the REI Mag platform. Just go to show's drop-down link where you'll find REI Talk. This webinar will be posted there after the show. So just give a little bit of background about today's talk. And we've got all our experts here waiting in the web. We've already had a robust debate before this, before we start. So every week here to give you both the bad news and the good news. It's always good and bad in the property world, but also the leading trends with expert insight so that you can learn and apply this in your business, your life, your property business, and your investments. And we've seen how this coronavirus has been managed in South Africa and worldwide, and how it's decimated many businesses and the global economy. And it's been crazy. The world is a crazy place right now. It's been shut down for more than 2 months and counting. But we've seen some positivity coming out. New Zealand is the first economy that's gone down to level 1. We're going to see some live rugby. People are going to connect with each other again, believe it or not. While their economy opens, it's all good news. We're hopeful that we will get there soonest. Many of us would like to have a crystal ball to see in the future and what it holds for us. And while there's a lot of uncertainty, if you are worried, we are here to help you. We've got our experts here to be a guide, to find a way forward in life, in business, in our investments. And nobody has all the answers, but we seek to listen to experts in the game as we navigate ourselves. So there are challenges of affordability of landlords and homeowners struggling to keep up with bond payments and tenants struggling to pay rent. And while there is a downside, there will also be an upside. I mean, interest rates are at the lowest level in more than 50 years, meaning cost of finance is cheaper. However, this has been dampened by uncertainties around unemployment, affordability, conservative bank lending, but we need to find a way to work through and around all these challenges. So let's get on to today's topic. and it's talking about affordable housing, and it's become one of the most pressing social needs and opportunities in the future of South Africa and in fact the rest of Africa. We've got all our experts here, all the players in the market. And so without further ado, what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves to you. So starting with Keisha. Keisha, would you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background to what you do? I think you just unmute yourself, Keisha. There we go.
Good. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's lovely to be here with you and with all the panelists, and then of course everybody who's participating. My name is Keisha Rust, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. We are a think tank. We promote investment in affordable housing across the continent, and we do that by undertaking research, collecting data, and producing data analytics that highlight the investment opportunity in affordable housing, whether it's in this country or in fact across the full continent.
Wonderful. Rob?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Rob McGaffin from the Urban Real Estate Research Unit. We're a research unit at UCT, where we basically use or take an economics and finance lens to look at urban issues and try to create a platform for better engagement between public and private sectors. And we have a particular interest in housing.
Wonderful. Mark?
Thanks, Neil, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this exciting panel. Nice to meet all the panelists. So my name is Mark Shonrock, and I'm with Concord Developments. I'm part of the Concord Group. So we are a wholly Black-owned infrastructure mining development company in South Africa. We've been around bordering on 116 years now, and actually we started back then in Cape Town from Marion Roberts, and then we were bought out by the Southern Palace Group and the PIC. And yeah, we operate in all markets in South Africa and SADC.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. Claire?
Hi, my name is Claire de Trevor. I am a project manager and the lead architect at BitProp. We are I don't know if we can call ourselves a startup, but we are still startup-ish. And we provide professional services and development finance to homeowners in townships to develop backyard rental accommodation.
Wonderful. Vickers?
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for the opportunity. So my name is Vickers. I represent Calgro. Calgro is South African-based. We call ourselves integrated housing developer. We also, of course, operate and manage our various memorial parks throughout the country. We specialize in integrated housing. That's basically bringing income groups together from fully subsidized till today, touching 1.2, 1.3 million. Typically our South Hills development. Our Ballard development will actually touch a bit higher. If you talk about FLISP housing, typically in the middle market, I think we're still one of the only guys who's able to do FLISP housing under 300,000 rand in sectional title, 2-bedroom type of units. And that's where we specialize. We also used to do our own construction. Many people might have read that we're busy closing that down. We realized that stick to our core competencies, we developers, we don't have to be the biggest contractors in town. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And welcome to all of you. It's wonderful to have such a great panel here in the affordable housing sector. Keisha, we're going to kick off with you. What do you think is the overall impact of housing and affordable housing on the South African economy right now? There we go.
Right now. Yeah, I mean, we're in a bit of a tense time right now, right? Because everything is suffering the effects of lockdown. And in the context, the summary or the heading of this whole talk is post-COVID-19. And I think we actually have to think quite carefully about what that means for housing as well. We are also aware of that ourselves because we are sitting in our homes and then starting to contemplate what that means in the affordable space and the level of housing inadequacy that does exist and the real opportunity to attend to that. And attending to that within the context of a response to what we've seen the impact of poor housing is on households' ability to resist the effects of the virus and of the pandemic, both health effects, mental health effects as well, all of that, it just becomes so imperative. So I think it's not only a conversation we're having about the opportunities of recovery, but also about promoting resilience of households within the context of this new world we're living in, and addressing very real risk levels that exist and extend. So it's in that framework that we've been thinking. And what CAF has done over the years, we've been looking at the impact of housing on the economies of a number of countries across the continent. And when we do that, we think about the whole value chain, everything from pulling the material out of the ground and turning that into cement, and then taking the wood and turning that into your roof trusses and so on. All of that going from your primary, secondary, and tertiary sector industries, and building that into the housing construction economy. And then that drawing in the labor, and then all of the other, the production of all of the goods that go into the production of the house and so on. So what is the impact of all of that into the economy? And normally we look at that from a construction perspective, and we don't isolate housing. But what we've started to do is isolate housing, because that is such an important sector and something that so much of our policy is focused at. So the broad housing sector, construction, and then also the rental of that housing, in terms of the services industry and everything that goes into the rental, all of that together impacts, it's 3.7% of our GDP. And that's significant. That's a big number. That's sort of comparable to other large sectors in the economy that you would think of. And if we agree, I'm going to guess that we're going to agree in this conversation that we are not operating at par right now, that we could be doing so much better. That if we improved bits along that housing delivery value chain, and in terms of our ability to operate functioning rental markets, the possibility to build that engine, that economic engine, so that it's more than 3.7% of GDP is significant. And if we do that, we're actually responding to the very real challenges that we're facing in the context of this COVID-19 pandemic. So right now, this is based on 2017 data, because it takes a while for the data to make its way through to the formula. But with that data that we could do, 3.7% of GDP, I think that's pretty fabulous. And it's at the bottom of the trough. I think we can grow that quite considerably.
Wonderful. Nice way to introduce. So Rob, moving on to you, why can housing play an important role in propelling the South African property market post-COVID-19?
You know, I think it actually picks up on what Casey is saying, and I think her point is important, is taking it from the economic point of view, or the economy point of view, and taking it from the household point of view. The role of housing in households' economies is massive. I mean, it represents 50 to 90% of all household savings are situated in people's housing, etc. So people's ability to handle these type of pandemics and that, the state of housing and their housing plays a huge role in terms of that. So just that alone, it's incredibly important. But from the economy point of view, and again, picking up in Casey's numbers, and I would actually argue that that number is probably higher as a percentage of GDP. It depends how you want to define it. It represents a lot, a significant part of our economy. Has huge value chain linkages, upstream and downstream linkages, etc. So in terms of stimulating the economy. And the one thing we have in South Africa, and this is going to sound like a bit of a strange thing, but the one advantage we have is we have a housing shortage, which we normally see as a negative thing and a problem, but it actually represents an opportunity to use that to stimulate the economy. I remember a German developer who was working in South Africa, and he said the best thing that South Africa has is the housing shortage. We don't have that problem in Germany like you have it here, and it's a problem. So I think from that point of view, I think it's very important. I think more specifically as well, when it comes to employment, even before COVID, we were facing some serious problems before COVID hit. And one of those is around employment. And if you look at housing and housing as a percentage of the construction industry, and then you look at the role of construction in the employment in the secondary sector, it's massive. In Cape Town, it's estimated at around about 30 to 35% of the secondary sector employment in Cape Town is in construction. And housing plays a big part of that. Now, what's particularly important there is, other than, I think, the food processing industry in Cape Town, it is one of the sectors that employs semi and unskilled people. We don't have a lot of those sectors that employ that type of person. And yet, if you look at the skills profile, and I'm just using Cape Town as an example because that's what I have the data for, you know, between 60 and 70% of our workforce is classified as semi-skilled or unskilled. So any sector that absorbs that sector is critical. And housing, hence, has a very important role to play as a result.
Excellent. Mark, where do you see the residential property market going in the future post-COVID?
So Neil, you know, we've been monitoring it extremely closely since during lockdown and since we've been allowed to start back up. And what we've seen is that already in the last month, everything that's related to upmarket or luxury or nice to haves, and all the way down to sort of travel and anything sort of air related, they all seem to be coming to a very quick, abrupt end, or being put on hold, or projects being cancelled, which is not great news for us as an economy, but I think it's a reality. Just in Cape Town alone, AXA, Cape Town International Airport, has stopped about 3 or 4 of their major projects, totaling about 6 billion rand worth of investment and development. During lockdown, all of those projects were put on hold, and some of them were quite far advanced. Enabling works had started. So we're seeing a drastic shutdown in anything upmarket and luxury. And the only projects that seem to be continuing with momentum and actually gaining traction, because like Rob said, there's a housing shortage, is affordable housing type projects. And you know, we've been lucky that thank goodness we were being involved in some fairly large ones here in Cape Town and also up in Joburg, because anything luxury related, there's no market. I think people are struggling and the economy is struggling, and luckily the middle class hopefully is not going to take too much of a knock, but and the interest rates is helping massively in terms of affordability. And as long as people have a certain amount of job security, things are becoming more accessible for them. And we've seen that during lockdown and the interest rate cuts in some of the sales with the guys involved in affordable housing. So that's a positive.
Yeah, great. Vickers, in your opinion, will government spend money on affordable housing, you know, infrastructure otherwise, and when do you think that could happen?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I think we have to take a step back and see what does housing do to the economy. So I just want to add to 1 or 2 things Mark and Rob and Shore said. We have to look at what the job creation is, about 1% GDP growth. So if you look even to a good years, construction created about 3% in the job market for every 1% GDP it creates, because of the comments already on the unskilled and semi-skilled labor. So that's very important for the South African job market. So if the South African government wants to unlock this economy, one of the biggest creators they can create from a job perspective is construction. And then what better place to spend it on is in housing. Everyone already spoke about the housing backlog, so I won't get into that. But the reality is, if we look philosophical about it, South Africa needs housing. We need to get to a point where, if you look at the inequality issues, people must be brought closer to the job opportunities. Do you want to get up in the morning at 3 or 3:30 to get in a taxi at 4:30 to be at your place of work at 6:37, and today follow that same stream track? So you almost take 4 to 5 hours out of everyone's daytime, which either could have worked harder, earn a bigger income for their family, uplift their family, or spend more time with family values. That wives are typically playing with the kids, helping the kids with schoolwork, that educational aspect. So I think if you look at the philosophical side of what housing does on a more social impact basis, and then add the housing backlog, then add the job creation, I think that government will spend money. We also know that some of the reallocations are going to the housing department. Just bear in mind that the housing department and the water and sanitation department is under one minister. So reallocations between their departments can happen. And we also do know that South Africa do have quite a bit of a water issue. So to keep that in mind. And what I must say is, even through the lockdown period, and Mark, I don't know what your experience has been with Cape Town, but we've had lots of support from specifically Western Cape provincial government in terms of projects. We've been allowed to go back to site even under level 4 on certain parts of it. And then in the same in Johannesburg, lots of governmental support, town planning process, how can we assist? And yes, not all, as these things happen, not all of them has come to fruition yet. Talk is cheap, but at least there's an effort to assist the sector.
Yeah, that's positive. Well, that's really good. So I think, Claire, I mean, you got a very different model. I mean, so and maybe you can just tell us, you know, what that model is. But I mean, how do you think the bid prop model can address the economic and the housing crisis post-COVID-19?
Yeah, so a little bit of background on BidProp and what we do. We essentially try to match investment, foreign and otherwise, to low-income housing markets in South Africa right now, but we are hoping and looking to expand across the African continent. And what we do is we partner with homeowners who are existing property owners who haven't been able to access other types of formal finance. We design and submit the plans for backyard rental units, and then we pay for those units, for the development costs, for the scrutiny fees at council, everything we pay for upfront, and we develop 4 to 8 rental units on a property, depending on the size of the property and the zoning in the particular area. And then we use the rental income revenue stream to sort of repay the capital investment that we've made into that property. And so we have quite an interesting agreement with the homeowner, where we are essentially the head tenant, and we sublet the units. And so the homeowner begins to make a passive income from day or from month 1. And over time, that amount, that the split between BidProp and the homeowner increases or changes over time. So they start off getting about 1,500 Rand a month, which is equivalent to a state pension. And then by the end of the 10 years, depending on inflation and increases and the rental demand, but currently how we're sitting at the end, by the end of 10 years, they should be getting close on 10,000 Rand a month, probably more. In some cases, one of the women who has 8 units, you know, it's already generating 20,000 Rand income a month, gross, obviously. So yeah, we are incredibly sort of excited about the prospects of, you know, how this model can really address a lot of the kind of economic issues that have come about because of COVID. A lot of what Casey and Rob have said around, you know, stimulating the value, like the whole value chain, and the building economy is something that we're focusing on. And we've really tried to shift, as we've opened back up, we've really tried to shift and look at how we can support local manufacturers on a much smaller scale. So like window manufacturers, using locally produced products rather than imported products, even though there might be a slight cost differentiation. But the biggest impact is really the fact that the homeowner who's been sitting on potentially a dead or a locked asset has now got access to a passive income. And a lot of people have immediately been like, oh, well, you know, it's reliant on rental and people can't pay their rent. But a lot of the market that we cater to, the tenant market that we cater to, are essential workers. So we have a high percentage of nurses who stay as tenants in our BidProp units. We have a lot of police people. And so we have found over the past 3 months, we only, out of the 18 tenants that we have, we've only had 1 tenant who was unable to pay rent at the end of last month. He let us know in advance. He was a waiter at a restaurant in the waterfront. He let us know in advance, and we've been able to structure a payment plan for him so that he's able to sort of, make up that rent at the time. So
is it true? Sorry, just to interrupt you, Claire, because in the bottom end of the rental market, it seems that they're more loyal, or they tend to pay their rental. They tend to put it high on the priority list. And I think you just demonstrated it in that point that you've just made.
Yeah, and I think what's been pre-COVID and now we're seeing during COVID, and I suspect we'll see post-COVID, is that what's really kind of critical and what makes our model a little bit different is that we're dealing with an individual landlord. And so it's not a faceless person where you're like, oh, well, I can't pay my rent this month, I'm not going to pay, and this big corporation will be able to like fit that bill. The tenants are living on the landlord's property. There is a relationship there that exists. And so there is a level of loyalty, like you say, but there's also more of a relationship for the tenant to be able to go to the landlord and be like, look, I might not be able to pay this month. What can I do? Can we make a plan? And that is really critical to our model, that micro scale. And that's why our kind of tagline is micro development at a macro scale, because it is really looking at the individual homeowner, the individual contractor, the individual tenants, and how all of those tiny pieces make up the bigger value chain.
Wonderful. So Keisha, coming back to you, we just need to unmute yourself on this. So Keisha, I mean, let's get back to the macro issues here again. I mean, what do you think it's going to take to get this affordable housing market going? I mean, this will be massive for the economy. I mean, and specifically for a post sort of COVID recovery plan. I mean, it could be huge. You've already demonstrated the size of market very nicely. I mean, Rob said it's slightly bigger, but yeah, what would it take to really get this going?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we can look at it in a couple ways. We can look at it across the value chain itself, the housing delivery value chain, and in each link there are problems. And I'm sure that that's something that Mark and Vic specifically will talk about in their experience and their developments. And something that we've all been exploring in different ways. I'm going to turn it around a little bit, because I think the thing that we need to look at from a macro perspective is the way the housing market works as a whole and the ladder that is facilitated in that process. Because it's in fact the housing ladder that provides almost the engine, or it makes it possible for those links to then be properly repaired. And let me just explain what I mean by that. In our housing sector right now, we have a whole bunch of sub-markets, and we almost think about them, we have different categories, and then we even think about them spatially differently. So we've got RDP housing, and that's there. And then we've got FLISP housing, and that's there. And then we've got affordable and entry, and then the conventional market. And spatially, they're often distinct. And then if they're not, we call that an integrated development, and that's fine. But we think about our housing market as the production of all of those different kinds of units. And that is fine, but it's two-dimensional. It doesn't actually respond to the way in which people operate and live in their houses, where in some cases they're accessing a house and then they'll sell it and they might move to another one. And there's a whole lot of movement, right? We talk about that as churn. So understanding the linkages between RDP, FLISP, affordable, entry, and so on makes each more possible to enable. We have 25 years of RDP housing that we've delivered already. That is about 2 million units sitting on our deeds registry right now that exists. And of that, I think, I just pulled up the number so I could share it with you, because it's kind of, well, it's massive. So of that 2 million government subsidized houses that are right now on the deeds registry, there are title deeds, so they're formal. About 1 million of those are in the major metros. And of that million, about 900,000 of them are older than 8 years, which is critical because we have a Housing Act restriction on selling of property for the first 8 years. You're not allowed to sell your house, your subsidized house, when you receive it. 900,000 units in the major metros are older than 8 years, which means that they could be sold. Now, how much do they sell for? They sell for anywhere between, can I even hazard it? Maybe like 100,000 Rand to 300, sometimes 5 and 6. But there are some 150,000 Rand properties that are there. Now, no one can build at that right now, not as a freehold unit. We have a case study that we just published on our website yesterday about a household who was earning 6,500 Rand, who got a mortgage because banks are looking at this market, who got a mortgage and bought a 230,000 Rand house. Now, no one can build that at the moment, but can you imagine the person who sold that 230,000 Rand house can now go and buy Mark's house that he's building? And suddenly he's got a buyer that has a deposit that may even make the loan to value ratio sitting at 50%, which means that the bank's going to come in much more enthusiastically. But also it means that the market that Mark has been building for, thinking about a first-time home buyer with no equity, which is the way we imagine our market, has now become wider because he's got a new buyer that's coming in with additional, he's increased the market he's building to. And if he can show that, and certainly Vickers can show that within his integrated developments as well, you go and show that back to the bank, well, then you can access more construction finance because obviously you're going to have more takeout. And for me, the real issue is about making those linkages work. What Claire's doing is critical because that also puts mobility into the system. By providing backyard rental, you have people that are going and renting, and then they can organize themselves and eventually they'll become part of the purchase side. But you also have a household who's earning an income, this passive income that they have, that they can go and invest into the next thing. And it's those linkages that are fundamental to the market that I think are really, really exciting. And if you give me a second, the things that are not working, and the reason that's not working is that we've screwed up actually on our approvals that allow the transfer. Things like getting your clearance certificates, things like getting your title deeds, a big issue. Things like being able to transact in the market with information. There isn't information at that bottom end of the market, and so on. And all of those things make it really difficult to transact. And what's happening is that a lot of people therefore are transacting informally, and then those units disappear from the market. And then if someone arrives with a deposit that they've got to go and buy one of Mark's units, it's probably about half of what they would have gotten if they'd done it formally. So so much of what we need to fix are sort of admin and logistics in making the market work and making it possible for people to move. The saving grace here, I think, is technology, because a lot of the mess we have is partly because we've been using spreadsheets and writing things on lists, and a lot of that just doesn't translate into efficiencies. And when we're dealing with millions of households, we need to use technology, and I'll stop there. But
yeah, no, correct.
We've got the opportunity now.
Wonderful. So I want to bring in Rob here now. So Rob, do you want to just elaborate on that? You know, how we could, take this whole thing forward, but also let's look at some of the challenges of propelling this market going forward post-COVID-19.
Sure, Neil. I mean, and I was just thinking about it when Casey was speaking, if the deeds office had all been online and we went into COVID, we wouldn't have had to have closed down half of the industry for 2.5, 3 months, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, there's a classic example of it right there in terms of using the technology.
Yeah.
I think to answer or to carry on from Casey's point of what can be done, I think the other thing we need to do is we do need to look at redeveloping and expanding our existing stock, because a lot of affordable housing projects and programs, et cetera, is very much sort of geared towards new build. And I always find it very contradictory in a way that we try to deal with the affordable issue with our most expensive product, which is the new build. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be building new, please. As many new projects we can do, let's do them, absolutely. But from an affordability point of view, we need to maximize our existing stock. One, it's cheaper, that existing stock is better located, And very important, and again, I think this speaks to Keisha's point. One of the big challenges and obstacles in this entire story is what I call the land production process, which is basically taking a piece of land to the point that you can put a brick in the ground. Now, I'm sure if you speak to Mark and Vickers and that, they can give us some long stories, etc. About, if you look at the length of a project, how much of that project time was taken up getting to that point. Often the construction part of the story is actually quite a short phase of the entire project. And if we look at redeveloping existing stock, I think we can overcome some of those problems, because you don't have to deal with some of the development rights and infrastructure issues, etc., that you have to deal with respect to new build. And I think, we've done a little bit of costing around this, and we estimate, and it will vary from project to project, obviously, but we estimate that for every year delay that you have in a project, you reduce the affordability between 15 and 20%. And now we've done some work with the Western Cape Property Development Forum recently. And in Cape Town, it's taking us between 5 to 8 years to get a development off the ground. Now, you can just see straight away there the impact on affordability as you extend out those project times. So it speaks again to Keisha's point. And what I'm, just to finish off, what I think is that what COVID has brought to the table, and it was already an issue before COVID, we've got to get inefficiencies out the system. We cannot afford to carry on with these inefficiencies in the system, because they are killing affordability.
Okay, I'm going to move over to Vickers. Vickers, where are the largest nodes of demand you're seeing in the low-cost housing market at the moment? Where's demand happening?
Neil, I think your metros. So if you take Johannesburg, Cape Town city centre specifically, and towards Bellville, and then Durban and surrounds, where there's job opportunities. Let's just be honest, we need to bring the workers closer to the job opportunities. It doesn't help we can go and do another development in the Northern Cape. It doesn't help we go and then next to Bethel, there's rows and rows. There's thousands of fully subsidized houses built there. That's all nice, but where are those people going to work? So I think it's in the nodes. And I want to add to what was just said by Rob on the, let's call it the brownfields projects, the current buildings. Your problem is you need a very specific building for that to work in a conversion. We've looked at many buildings over the years. And if you speak to Rian Reineke and them that's doing that Absat House in Joburg now, also remember you need deep equity pockets. So you need upfront capital. You need to now go and acquire that building or do a partnership with the bank, which is Absa in that case. And then your phases must be much bigger. So that's why it's always a challenge on the current builds. But what we have to look at is the government buildings over the years. And there's been lots of action. If you look at City of Cape Town, if you look at City of Johannesburg, where they try to do it, but it always starts, oh, very nice. There's lots of speeches, there's lots of launches, but it doesn't get further than that. Make that buildings available and say, don't come and pay for it. Don't come and bring extra bulk contributions. Because the other thing we have, which you can't look past, is we've got a big challenge of electricity and water in this country and the bulk infrastructure. That infrastructure is already created for those buildings, but assist them to do, or us as developers to do it in a phased approach. And that's what we're not getting. As I said, there's lots of talk around it. It's definitely the capitals where the job opportunities are, in my perspective anyway.
Okay, great. So Mark, I've got a question here from the audience, and it says, Mark, how do you integrate social housing with your 1.5 million apartment market units? And do you find resistance from property owners of units from 1.5 million plus to stay next to subsidized rental units? Probably be the lower end. What are your thoughts around that?
Yes, great question. Thanks, Neil. But just before we get onto that, I just want to touch on Rob's comment about, what does he call it, land production. So Rob, about a year or two ago, I used to have a lot more hair, and let me tell you that land production is difficult. And yeah, just going on to Victor's comments about bulk infrastructure and DCs and city approvals, and I mean it's a tough industry. And you're right, building the building is the easy part. Getting the land to the point where you can actually put a brick in it, that's hard and expensive. So I do think there's a lot to work on there. And before we get to the question, just touching on the building reuse, I think it's a great idea and a great concept, Rob. And there has been a lot of talk, they talked about the four-tracker corridor in Cape Town, which has huge potential. There's so many unused buildings. And I think it's all about how it's approached. So don't make the developer who wants to bring in affordable housing pay for it up front, sit on that massive interest bill. It's sitting there anyway, and it's not generating any income. So let them partner with government and bring it to a point where you can actually put people in and then start creating an income, and everyone wins. So, and Steve Joburg as well. How many sites did they release, Vickers? I think it was 71 buildings or something.
Yeah, 71. None has come off.
Within the inner city. We also tried to get involved in, I think, about 4. We're still in discussions, but I think that was a year ago, and we're still talking. So it is a difficult process. And the one thing that I would like to just point is in this whole affordable housing is we can't do it alone. We need government's help, and we need governments and the cities to come on board and assist and approach it from a partnership point of view rather than a them and us. To say, guys, pay this and then you get that. It needs to be thought about a bit differently. But just getting on to the question, Neil, that was exact one of the risks that were identified to say, if someone is spending R1.5 million plus on a market residential unit, what is his perception going to be for a grant funded or a social housing unit next door? And we did a tour of the country, and we visited a lot of the social housing developments around the country. And if I was to blindfold you and put you in one of those developments and say, right, where are you? You wouldn't know the difference. If I put you in a commercial residential development, whether it's a Borwin or a Rabi or whoever the big guys are around the country, or if it was a social housing development, the buildings were immaculate, the grass was perfect, there wasn't a piece of litter in sight. People were so welcoming and open to us with their homes. And I think what people don't realize, and it's a perception and a mind shift change, is these are normal people. This is just like you and me, and the only difference is they earn less than us. That's the only difference. And Claire, you said that your tenants are all policemen, nurses. That's who we need to build for. City officials, all of our administrative staff, they fit that target market perfectly, that income bracket. So it's all around a perception shift, and it's a how you change the market's perception around what you're creating. And I think the only way we're going to do it is to by example. That's really that's how we're going to change it.
Neil, if I may add to Mark quickly, I also think people can't look past the cross-subsidization effect of these integrated developments. So let's take Conradi. So Mark will know that we were up against him, so we've got quite a bit of detail on the project. If it's not how the project is structured, that R1.5 million houses would have went to the market at 2 million to make the feasibility work. So people must also realize they're buying a R1.5 million product at a big discount because it's an integrated type of development. So that's a big critical aspect of it. And just to further add, what people haven't spoken about yet on the panel today is, I think the Reserve Bank have done us a great favor with the interest rate cut. We've got 275 basis points in the last how many months. That effectively on a R500,000 house, again, touching on the flip housing, the difference it makes in your installment is effectively 1,200 Rand a month on 500,000. Now, if you take the all-in cost of a 500,000 Rand house costing you, say, 6,000 Rand a month, that's your installment, excluding even flips. So your installment, your rates and taxes, your fixed sewer and bin charge. That's 20% saving comparison. That's greater than what we said earlier about the increase on a year-on-year. That's greater than what the extra 100,000 Rand bond would have cost you. So that's a great discount to the consumer. And I think that's something that will really stabilize this market in the next year.
Wonderful. Claire, I've got a question here for you from the audience. I think it's a great question. Claire, what is the general criteria to qualify for backroom development funding? Are you financing all townships in all areas? And do you finance only backrooms? Or would you finance development of rooms or flats where there is no standing house? In other words, develop vacant land.
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay, so quite a loaded one there. We currently, our criteria is that you have to have a title deed. We are working towards, like what Casey touched on around technology, like an alternative title deed registry and system where we can verify ownership in other ways, but that's sort of future BitProp. Or pipeline BitProp. So at the moment, our criteria is that you have to be, you have to have a title deed. You obviously have to be the owner or have access to the owner of that property. Ideally, we're looking for people who are less than 45 years, younger than 45 years old. This is because we are working with banks we'll do the financing of the initial development, and then we're looking to on-sell the investment as a standard kind of typical low cost, or not low cost, but low sized home loan. And this is just obviously more beneficial to the homeowner. We help the homeowner pay that home loan off in 10 years, which reduces the cost of that home loan significantly as well. So yeah, owner of the land, ideally under 45, and we have previously only been working with women, but it's not actually like a criteria for us, or a strict criteria. We currently are just working with people who have property in Khayelitsha. The reason for that is because we have a very good working relationship with the city council in Khayelitsha, and the city, the zoning regulations there are a lot more lenient, and we're able to develop, but we're also working very hard with city officials to develop an alternative portal that all backyard rental can go through. So if you're applying from Hout Bay, instead of having to go through South Peninsula, I know this is very Western Cape specific right now, but instead of having to go through your district, you will actually just go through a rental housing portal. This is obviously very sort of long term, but again, we can see how COVID and the effects of having to work remotely have sped up. Like over this time, we've seen that City of Johannesburg and Durban have opened online plans portals, which they didn't have before. And so we're really hoping that we can push this through so that developments like these small scale ones are not sitting behind like a Conradi Park or Conradi development, because we're looking at 4 units, and the way the pipeline works at the moment is just taking very long. Sorry, long way to say that we're working in Khayelitsha, but we are starting to branch out to other areas. Hopefully by the end of the year we'll have our first site in Joburg up and running. And then we are starting to look at properties that is just vacant land. Because of the way our model works, we have a very standardized plan, which is 4 units that can obviously be doubled to 8. So if we can work that plan to on a vacant piece of land to accommodate 8 to 12 units and get that through planning, then we would definitely look at that.
Wonderful. Great. I've got a general question. Keisha, I'm going to ask you maybe to have a go at it. I mean, it's related to developers. I'm sure Vickers and Mark would definitely want to also contribute, but Rob, also I want you to come in as well. And the general question is, I've been on some webinars where a predominantly white panel of developers seek to develop and sell to the broader market, and specifically in the affordable market. Consider micro units. However, one black panelist painted a very different picture of what the black market aspires to. And the question is, are the developers really listening to the market? Keisha, do you want to have a go at that? And Rob, I think let's have a debate. And in fact, I'll bring in Vickers and Mark because they're talking about you guys here. Keisha, you want to have a go on that?
I mean, I think the developers have to listen to the market because that's the nature of their business. And if they don't listen to the market, then they're not going to be able to sell their units. And the whole notion of market targeting is so, so important. And something that I think we're getting better at, but we've not been, whether as a nation and in fact across the continent, market targeting has been a challenge all the time. So a developer may have an idea in their mind and pursue that only to find, in fact, that the market needs something entirely different. I would argue that that's a lesson you learn once, and then if you're still in business, you continue, you actually recognize what the market requires. That said, I do think that, and Claire raised it, in terms of the way in which their business model is working, they're working with a completely different kind of developer. They're working with very small scale developers with this, your byline's a bit different, but it's massive small, right? It's making a massive impact with a whole lot of little interventions. And there's real opportunity in that. And I think that from a finance side, that financiers and investors really need to recognize the diversity of developers that actually do exist, that serve different parts of the market, and therefore also need different kinds of capital going into them. I think that we can't get, I mean, the majority of housing that's delivered right now in this country, even in this country, is built in people's backyards by themselves. And we have a very sophisticated construction sector, but the level of supply is actually, and so if we could start to leverage that, so that happens in the company of the larger scale developments, which we also absolutely need, but that they happen together. And in fact, that some of the effort that Vickers and Mark put into kind of like bushwhacking the system to work could then also start to benefit the flow of materials and finance and labor and all of that for the smaller guys. And you would have a much more efficient sector where everyone delivers to this, I think, massive demand diversity.
Okay, Rob, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a very important point. I mean, I think we also have in our minds this idea, this is what Francois Varelli always calls the notional developer. You know, that a developer looks a particular way, et cetera, and I think we've got to recognize that, you know, any person who builds a room on their house is a developer. And so I think we need to recognize but the range of it. To come back to the question that was asked, you know, I've been tracking some of these smaller units since about 2010, 2011, and when what started out as just a few popping up on the landscape has now become the norm. And those buildings are all occupied, they're all tenanted, et cetera. So those developers are clearly responding to a demand. And I would argue, and I haven't seen, but I would argue the vast majority of those tenants are black. So they would be responding to black tenants per se. And I think the scale is actually huge. It's the number that I have in my head, and I don't know how accurate it is, but it's somewhere in this space. In Kailita alone, you know, over about a 3-year period, they had over 4,000 building plan applications to do 6,000. There we go. Claire's just correcting me. 6,000 building plan applications to do these rental units. Now, to give you some perspective of how big that number is, I've just looked at the figures recently. In the last 6 years, Cape Town was only developing 9,000 houses a year. So if in Kailita alone, over 3 to 4 years, you've got 6,000 building plan applications, it's a massive percentage of that. So I think they are a major player, and they are clearly responding to what the market is looking for.
Absolutely. Great. So we're coming out, just conscious of time. We are approaching sort of the 1 o'clock just before wrap up. But I've got a question here for Vickers, and I want to also bring in Mark. If you want to comment as well on that previous comment, you're welcome to. But this is probably, it's a question for Vickers, but I think it's a question for Mark as well. And the question is, the easiest way to get affordable housing closer to the town centers is to densify and make apartments smaller. do you believe that South Africans will embrace these type of units? So probably Vickers and then Mark, I'm sure maybe you would like to both comment on that.
Okay, Neil, let's just touch on the previous point. If we didn't build what the community wanted, they wouldn't have bought it. They would have rented it. So to me, I hear the question, but I don't think it's valid. Based on this question, densify, just remember, we as developers, and we spoke about it before the conference call with Mark, only going up to 8 stories. We would go up much higher. We would densify a lot more if we can. We just don't have the approval always. Also, if you look at what plans get approved in Coalition and the like, these processes just take long. But if you look at smaller units, yes, I think the market will take up smaller units. What do we all want? We all want a big house and a big stand. The reality is we not all can afford a big house and a big stand. And the other reality is if you take Johannesburg, go out to the West Rand, Ramsey, even other side of Ramsey, you look at those developments. But the price is an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning in Sandton traffic and the same out. But you don't want to do that. Okay, you can move closer to the workplace, but you move into a smaller unit. The one limiting factor as well at this stage is densification. And then the other one is that the banks have this thing of we only finance 40 square meters. We've tried in the heart of Soweto and we sold all of them. A lot of bachelor 22 square meter units, you struggle. So the rental companies can go smaller because they let it. But as soon as you want to sell it, you want someone to have a third party bond or mortgage. That becomes a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, great. Mark, I'm going to come back to you. Keisha, I know you've got a little bit of a time issue, and I want to stick to time for everybody because I want everybody a chance to wrap up. Unfortunately, we have come to close to the end of the webinar. So, Keisha, maybe you could give us a wrap up from your side in terms of the way forward. How can we take this forward, given what was discussed now today? How do you think how can we fast track this thing, and what needs to be done, and how can we do it to take this forward? If you could wrap up first and
try
to the audience. Yeah.
I think the one thing that's come out quite strongly is a question around the role of the state. We talk a lot about the role of the state, and we think about it in terms of subsidization, and everything we do is defined in terms of how much money the state gives to it. And in fact, all the problems that are listed about other things that the state does in the development process, and I think the biggest currency that the state operates with is time. And so the way in which the state determines zoning for particular areas, the time that approvals take, the ability to access those approvals. There are issues around infrastructure investment, definitely, that the state could do. But then, of course, also access to information and what's happening. And Claire talked about that as well, about the new platforms that are available to show planning and so on. And then lastly, around governance, and so that areas are indeed investable. We've been starting to think about this concept of greenlining, where there's an effort made to recognize and create investable areas, low-end areas, high-end. Pretty much the residents associations keep that covered. But in low-end areas, certainly an attention to good governance in that space. That then raises a challenge back to the private sector and to the financiers to recognize the diversity of opportunity, of development opportunity. So to package their finance so that it's available for large-scale developments, but also so that it's available for smaller scale developments, and for goodness sakes, so that you can buy a unit that's smaller than 40 square meters. That really should be obvious at this point. And it doesn't change the longevity of a unit if it's smaller than 40 square meters. So I think that there's a real need on the part of all of the players to think about what's needed to make the market work. I would love a challenge back to the state to say that, in fact, the money is perhaps less important than the time and the systems and the approvals and making everything work smoothly.
Keisha, I would like to thank you for your contribution today. It's wonderful. I know you have to rush off. It's not a problem. We'll excuse you from the panel. And so Keisha Rist, the Executive Director and founder of Center for Affordable Housing Finance, thank you very much. I'd like to move back to, thank you, Keisha. We'll see you later. Mark, we're going to go back to you. I'd like you just to, first of all, just finish off on that previous question that we were talking a little bit earlier on. And then if you could also wrap up at the same time. And then Claire, we'll get to you, Vickers, and then last of all, Rob, if you don't mind, in that order.
Thank you, Neil. So I think it's a great question, and it's something that definitely deserves some thought and has had a lot of thought, at least from our side. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of money on market research, and we don't just segregate it by race. We look for our target market. So whether it's by income or area, and we try and understand what the target market wants, whether it's going to be this development might be more black orientated or colored orientated or mixed, and so I think and one thing has come out of it, and you talk about apartments. From our market research and the one development, we actually found that yes, it's great to have a small unit and that, but it might not be what a certain demographic wants to live and needs. And we found out that a 2-bedroom and in fact in some areas a 3-bedroom apartment, because a lot of the time a certain community would have their grandmother or grandfather to come and stay with them, and that 3rd bedroom becomes invaluable, and you actually can rather pay a little bit more and have the luxury of it. So it's all about trying to understand your market and read it, and we do spend a lot of time and money on that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. That's for wrap up. Claire, if you could just give us your wrap up, please. Claire, you need to switch yourself on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just sort of building on that and also just closing off, and sort of something that we've really tried very hard at BitProp in the last year to do is really to understand what else is available. And one of the big things, like Rob spoke about, is this backyard rental is not like, it's not a new idea. We didn't come up with it. We've just found an interesting way of allowing more people access to different types of finance. And what we've really tried to do is we've tried to bring a better product onto the market at the same cost. So something, and relating back to sort of COVID, is we really looked at how other units, there were separate rooms with a shared bathroom. And so one of the kind of differentiators of our units is that all of the units have a small kitchenette and their own ensuite bathroom. And I think when we start to think about affordable housing, like we've spoken a lot about the value chain and stimulating the economy, but we also have to think about like the impact of hygiene and sanitation and how we design and how the ethics of what we're building for the future, because these are very long lifespan products that we're putting onto the market. And so that's something that we're really focusing on, is how going forward all of our units will be naturally ventilated. All of our units will have better hygiene and sanitation standards to other products on the market, and how this will allow people in the future to have a safe space that they can isolate in if they need to, because I think that's been one of the biggest issues in our townships, is that people haven't been able to isolate because there aren't enough affordable products on the market for people to be able to afford their own space. So yeah, that's what we'll be.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. Okay, so Vic, sorry, Claire, I interrupted you. I missed you.
No, I was just saying thanks for having me today.
Absolute pleasure. An absolute pleasure. Okay, so moving on to Vickers then. If you could just give us your wrap up. I know, Vickers, we didn't get to a lot of questions, which we could deal with a bit later. There were a lot around FLISP and the developer also managing the units thereafter. But maybe you can give us your wrap up, please.
I think my wrap up is that we've got 2 major problems in this country. The first being inequality, and the other one being unemployment, and they're both related. The reality is that housing, not necessarily affordable housing, you would have seen that we actually done away with the word affordable. The investment decision for a family buying a 400,000 and 500,000 rand house is actually bigger than a family buying a 2 million rand house in proportion to what it does to their lives. But housing development and infrastructure development associated to that is critical. And that can, as we had the numbers earlier, for every 1% GDP, looking at 3% unemployment or employment creation, that can really make a difference, South Africa. We believe the next year or 2 is going to be very uncertain in terms of COVID. In fact, we right-sized our business. We didn't start up all our sites. We are concerned about the typical next lockdown, whether it's self-imposed or governmental imposed. But I do believe that part of the big unlocking factors can be housing development, just merely because of the social impact of it. And as I say, both solving employment and inequality to a large extent. So we're very positive, and we believe we can assist, and all developers can assist, making great progress in that.
Wonderful. Nice way to wrap up, Vickers. So Rob, it's you to give us the last word and the wrap up there for us.
Thanks very much, Neil. Just one last thing to pick up on, going into these smaller units and the micro units, and I'm seeing some of the comments that are coming in from the listeners. I think a lot of it's about people making trade-offs between size and location, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there are two things we need to do. One, we need to provide choice, a range, number one. And number two, I think the household is the best institution to make that trade-off. Let them make the trade-off of what size and location, et cetera, they want to actually live in. And we need to provide that particular choice. And in terms of the size, it's not about whether something's too big or too small. From a financing point of view, it's about how many incomes can get accommodated in that space. So you could have a 3 or 4 bedroom unit, but if it's got 2 or 3 incomes in that space, well, then it's affordable. I just think we need to, there's not a one size fits all in this conversation. And then just to finish off, I have to be honest with you, I'm actually very optimistic going forward. And I'm optimistic for 2 reasons. The one is, it's great that housing is no longer the poor cousin. We were always but the property world, housing was always seen as the poor cousin, and it was always about offices and retail, et cetera, et cetera. And quite frankly, at the moment, I think there's 2 games, two things in the game at the moment: logistics and housing. And so if you're in housing, you're in the right space, I think, at this point in time. And the second reason why I'm optimistic is that a lot of the issues that we've raised over the last hour, and Casey was speaking about them, and a lot of the issues with the government, and I think Vickers and Mark were talking about their engagement with the state over the last 2 months, is since we've raised a lot of these issues, I've had an incredibly positive response from a lot of officials at province and the city, et cetera, to actually take on some of these issues. And I think that's really encouraging going forward. So I do think that we are, it's going to take us a long time, and we'll probably not solve all of them, but I think we're on the right track, and people are starting to pull in the same direction around these different issues. So I think that's great.
That's a wonderful way to wrap up, Rob. Thank you very much to all of you, our panelists, for your valuable contribution today. To Casey Arist, who's the Executive Director and founder of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance. Rob McGaffin, Town Planner, Land Economist, is a lecturer at UCT, Department of Construction Economics. Mark Schonrock, he's Property Development Director, Concord Construction. Vickers Ladachan is the Group Managing Director for Calgo M3. And to Claire de Devaux, of Architectural Project Manager for BidProp. Thank you all very much. I think it was a valuable discussion. I think we need to continue this going forward. And then I'd like to thank you, the audience, for being so patient, for staying with us, and for all your wonderful questions. We will see you again next week, Friday at 12 o'clock for our next weekly webinar. And that's going to be where and how to invest offshore. Believe it or not, it's either offshore, it's here. It's certainly, that's next week's discussion. But for those of you who came on late, you had to log out early on this webinar. You can still view the replay, which will be posted on the REI platform. Just go to show's drop-down link where you'll find REI Talk. And to register, you can either go to the link, which is in the chat box below, or go to the REI website and register on the front page, or click on the link below. Very important announcement. Don't forget about our half-day virtual property masterclass. So it's exactly for these kind of people, for first-time home buyers and investors, typically what we were talking about today. And that's going to be on Thursday, the 13th of August from 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock. And we will be approaching a lot of the panelists here today as well to participate in that. And we are hosting this virtual masterclass in conjunction with Let's Talk Property, our webinar and virtual conference partners. We already have over 60 expert speakers, 16 hours of property investment content and education. We're giving away a free digital property investment guide, plus an opportunity to become a member of a property network with incredible benefits for the buyer and the investor. And this is a free webinar. So we encourage you to sign up very quickly, and we're limiting it up to 10,000 delegates, and we're signing in up fast. So To register, all you need to do is click on the link in the chat box below. And so don't miss this first in a series of life-changing and educational webinars for you. So that brings us to the end. I'd like to end with an inspirational quote from John Bogle. He's a highly successful American investor. He says, learn every day, but especially from the experiences of others. It's much cheaper. And on that note, this is Neil Peterson of REMAG signing out of this week's REI Talk. Until next week, Friday at the same time, stay safe and have a great weekend, everybody. Wonderful to see you. Cheerio.